Hey everyone, and welcome back. Ever feel like there are these books, you should read, but they're just so long and dense?
Yeah.
Well, that's what we're tackling today with Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. This deep dive is like your cheat sheet to its most powerful ideas.
And get ready, because Peterson doesn't mess around. He just dives right into this deep end of how we find meaning as humans, especially when life feels chaotic.
Totally. And he brings in everything. Psychology, philosophy, even personal stories.
Right.
Feels like he's really wrestled with this stuff himself.
Oh, yeah.
One thing that really stood out to me was what he says about millennials and morality.
Oh, yeah.
It's like this weird tightrope walk these days.
Totally. He points out this contradiction that young people are told, like, morality is relative, just do your own thing. But then there's this huge pressure to be morally outraged and pick a side no matter what.
Yeah.
And it's just a recipe for confusion.
Totally. Because if everything's relative, how do you even decide what's right or wrong in the first place?
Right.
It's like you're paralyzed before you even start.
Exactly. Peterson says that's where things get dangerous. We're tempted to cling to these rigid ideologies that claim to have all the answers.
Right.
But those always oversimplify things.
Of course.
And when they fail, it creates this blame game. Us versus them.
So what's the alternative? Do we just throw out like thousands of years of human wisdom?
Not quite. Peterson says we should actually turn towards those old stories and myths. He sees them as these treasure chests of timeless wisdom about human nature.
Like the Bible, Greek myths, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
He seems to find so much meaning in those stories.
He does. For example, he kept having this dream where he was stuck in the middle of a cathedral, couldn't escape.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it really freaked him out.
Yeah, I can see why. What did he make of it?
He eventually realized it was showing how each person is at the center of their own existence.
Right.
And they're shouldering that weight. He even connected it to the symbol of the cross.
Wow.
Like marking the spot, suffering and transformation.
Yeah.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah, definitely. But I get what you mean about these stories having like deeper truths about like what it means to be human.
Totally.
And speaking of deeper truths, are you ready to talk about lobsters?
Oh, here we go.
Huh.
The lobster analogy. It's definitely a conversation starter.
That's putting it mildly. So for those who haven't read the book, why are we even talking about lobsters? What do they have to do with this?
So Peterson uses lobsters to explain dominance hierarchies.
Okay.
And get this, he says they're not just a human thing, they're woven into nature itself. And lobsters, believe it or not, have this nervous system that reacts to their place in the hierarchy.
So like the higher up the lobster ladder they climb, the better their life is.
Yeah.
More food, shelter, all of that.
Exactly. And here's where it gets interesting. Even lobsters have serotonin.
Really?
The higher ranking lobsters have more of it, which makes them bolder and less anxious. Sound familiar?
Yeah, but we're not out here fighting over scraps with claws.
Right.
Humans are a bit more complex than lobsters, right?
True, but Peterson's point is that the basic biology is similar. Our brains are also wired to be aware of our social standing, and it affects us more deeply than we realize. Our stress levels, relationships, even our physical health.
See, that's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Makes you think, where do I stand in all the different hierarchies I'm a part of?
Right.
And how is that messing with my well-being?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those are the questions Peterson wants us asking. But he doesn't shy away from the darker side of this either. He argues that just like in those ancient myths, we have a capacity for both good and evil within us.
It's like when he talks about soldiers who come back from war with PTSD. Often, it's not just from what they witnessed, but also from realizing what they themselves were capable of in those situations.
Exactly. Peterson uses that to illustrate the shadow side of human nature.
Yeah.
The part we all try to pretend isn't there.
So how do we deal with that shadow side? How do we even begin to face it without, letting it take over?
Well, Peterson says it's not about suppressing those darker impulses, but understanding them.
Yeah.
It's like shining a light on those hidden parts of ourselves so they lose their power.
Good.
When we acknowledge that capacity for evil, we're more aware of it, both in ourselves and others, and less likely to fall into those traps.
Kind of like that saying, know thy enemy. But in this case, the enemy is a part of us, something we need to integrate, not destroy.
Exactly. And that leads us to another key point, the tyranny of our unconscious beliefs. We're often running on autopilot, driven by habits and beliefs we don't even realize are holding us back.
Speaking of unconscious beliefs, we have to talk about the story of Miss S. That one really got to me.
Ah, yes, Miss S and her 50-page dream journal CV.
50 pages. Was she serious?
Well, that's what Peterson tried to help her figure out. This story perfectly illustrates how we can be blinded by our own unexamined beliefs and habits, even when they're clearly not serving us well.
It's like sleepwalking through life. Except instead of bumping into furniture, we're making choices that keep us stuck. Kind of terrifying when you think about it.
Right.
Have you ever had a Miss S moment? I know I've had a few.
Oh, we've all been there. Think about a time you reacted to something in a way that, looking back, wasn't helpful at all. Those are the moments when our unconscious beliefs are running the show.
Totally. So how do we break free from that autopilot mode?
Well, Peterson's a big believer in the power of honest communication, both with ourselves and with others. He says it's one of the best ways to break those unconscious patterns. He tells this great story about a work crew and a guy they called Lunch Bucket.
Oh, right, the guy who was constantly getting picked on.
Yeah, and he was too afraid to speak up about how badly he was being treated.
What happened to him?
Let's just say he learned the hard way that staying silent doesn't always work out. The situation became so unbearable that he ended up quitting. It's a stark reminder that you have to set boundaries and advocate for yourself, even when it's hard.
Wow, yeah, tough lesson. But it makes you realize that speaking your truth, even if your voice shakes a little, is so important for a healthy life, both personally and professionally.
Absolutely. And this ties into another important idea from Peterson, the importance of becoming a truly good listener. He draws on the work of Carl Rogers, another influential psychologist, who believed in the transformative power of really hearing someone.
Like really truly listening, not just waiting for our turn to talk.
Exactly. Rogers even had this technique where during a disagreement, you couldn't share your own perspective until you accurately summarized the other person's viewpoint.
So you're forced to step into their shoes, to really try to see the world through their eyes.
Exactly. It's a powerful exercise in empathy and can be incredibly transformative for both people involved. It's about creating a space for real dialogue where everyone feels heard and understood.
It makes me think about how often we're all just waiting for our turn to talk, instead of actually listening to what the other person is saying. It's like two separate monologues instead of a genuine conversation.
You nailed it. And I think that's a huge part of what Peterson is getting at. He doesn't want us to just win arguments. He wants us to have conversations that help us all learn and grow.
Right. It's not about dominating the conversation. It's about connecting with the other person and maybe even learning something new. Which brings us to Peterson's more practical advice for self-improvement. It's not all just big philosophical ideas. He actually gives concrete steps we can take to improve our lives.
Absolutely. He uses this analogy of setting small, achievable goals, like making things just a little bit better each day. He's not talking about grand gestures. It's about consistent, incremental progress.
Like that compound interest effect he talks about.
Exactly.
Even tiny changes over time add up to huge results. Like, we should treat building a better life like making small deposits into a savings account.
Precisely. It's a really empowering concept.
Yeah.
It means that even when we're struggling or feeling totally overwhelmed, we can still make a difference by focusing on those small, manageable things.
It reminds me of that Kaizen philosophy I read about once, the idea of continuous improvement. You don't need to do everything perfectly right away. Just focus on making those small positive changes consistently, and it snowballs from there.
Exactly. And Peterson has some really interesting ideas about how we can apply that in our everyday lives. He's big on being conscientious, setting our house in order, both literally and metaphorically.
So like paying attention to the little details, like actually cleaning your room, making the bed, putting some effort into how you present yourself to the world.
Exactly. He argues that those seemingly insignificant actions actually have a huge impact on our mental state. They create a sense of order and control, which can be really grounding when life feels chaotic.
It's like a ripple effect. Taking care of the small stuff builds momentum, and that can lead to bigger, more positive changes. It's about taking ownership of our own lives, starting with the things right in front of us.
Right. But Peterson doesn't stop there. He challenges us to consider what we would be willing to sacrifice for something truly meaningful, something that goes beyond our immediate desires and anxieties.
So thinking about the bigger picture, like what kind of legacy we want to leave behind, it's not about fleeting pleasures or material things, but about connecting with something larger than ourselves. So like finding our purpose, that thing that makes life feel meaningful, not just about getting by.
Exactly. And Peterson says that purpose doesn't have to be some big world-changing thing.
Right.
It could be as simple as being a good parent, a reliable friend, someone your community can count on.
I like that. It feels doable, even inspiring.
Yeah.
But how does this connect back to everything else we've talked about? It feels kind of overwhelming when you put it all together.
That's what's so cool about Peterson's work. He takes these huge, complex ideas and makes them relevant to our daily lives. Remember that dream he had? Being trapped in the cathedral, that feeling of like existential weight.
Yeah.
He says we all carry that weight, that sense of responsibility for our own little universes.
Like the weight of the world is on us, even if it's just our world, you know?
Exactly.
It sounds like Peterson doesn't want us to think of that as a bad thing.
Right. He wants us to embrace that responsibility.
Right.
See it as a chance to make things better, even if it's just in our own little corner of the world.
Okay.
He uses this great analogy of aiming upward.
So it's not about being perfect overnight. It's more like we set our sights high and take those small, consistent steps to get there.
Exactly. Think of it like this. You're always moving, forward or backward.
Okay.
Peterson wants you to aim upward. Constantly try to become a slightly better version of yourself, even just 1% better each day. Those small improvements really add up.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's like we're investing in our future selves,
Yeah.
one little step at a time. But it's not just about self-improvement, right?
No.
Peterson also talks about responsibility to others, our communities, even the world.
Yes. He's a huge advocate for speaking the truth, being honest and direct in all your interactions. He even says that staying silent, especially when we see injustice or things that aren't right, makes us complicit.
It's like that lunch bucket story. Powerful reminder that speaking up, even when it's uncomfortable, is the right thing to do.
Absolutely. It takes courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. And Peterson says that kind of courage is essential for a healthy society. He connects it back to those old myths, too.
Oh, yeah.
The hero usually has to confront some powerful evil, even if it means putting themselves at risk.
So, like, we're all called to be heroes in our own way, to deal with whatever challenges life throws at us, and try to leave things a little better, a little less chaotic.
I love that. It's about recognizing the potential for both good and evil within ourselves, and consciously choosing to side with good, taking responsibility for our actions, our words, the impact we have.
And Peterson reminds us that this isn't just some philosophy. It's about those choices we make every day, the small actions that, when you add them up, can create a more meaningful life for ourselves and those around us.
Beautifully said. I think that's a powerful challenge Peterson leaves us with. To face the chaos with courage, speak our truth, and strive to make things a little bit better each day. It's not easy, but it's worth it.
Totally. And who knows, maybe by embracing those challenges, by taking ownership, we might find those tough things aren't just obstacles, but opportunities for growth, even transformation.
What a great point to end on. What if, by aiming upward, by actually trying to live by these rules, we could create a world with a little less chaos and a little more meaning? Something to think about.
Definitely something to think about. Oh, on that note, we'll leave you to ponder those big questions. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. Until next time.